Hi there, Michael here. I recently released a tutorial video about how to get started with Eclipse Audio in Reaper. Now, if you're interested in immersive audio production and haven't seen it yet, I'd recommend giving it a watch. Eclipse Audio is a quite interesting new approach to immersive audio, but it does have a few, let's call them, quirks. I got a couple of interesting questions and comments on my channel as well as on our Discord server, and there was one comment in particular that I wanted to talk about. I therefore felt it might be time for another question and answer video. So today I'm going to respond to a couple of your takes on Eclipse Audio, and in doing so I'll talk a bit about why it's generally a bad sign for a technology if it's immediately released as open source. Let's get started. Before we jump into your questions, we should talk briefly about what exactly Eclipse Audio is. Now, in a nutshell, Eclipse Audio is a new immersive audio format that is based on IAMF, and IAMF is short for Immersive Audio Modeling Format, and that's an attempt by major industry players, including Samsung and Google, to define a common open standard for audio in immersive media. It follows in the footsteps of things like Dolby Atmos, MPEG-H, or the Apple Spatial Audio format. There are two important things to note. First, while people talk about it being an audio format, it's technically really more of a container format. It defines how audio in various formats can be combined in the form of so-called audio elements to produce a combined immersive sound experience. The classic example that I covered in my tutorial would be to take a sound ambience in the Ambisonics format and overlay that with a narration that is in headlocked stereo. Eclipse Audio provides an audio container that can achieve that. Second, Eclipse Audio is fundamentally a channel-based format. It can take in a large variety of channel-based audio, ranging from classic surround formats such as 5.1, 7.1 up to 9.1.6 and beyond, to scene-based formats such as Ambisonics in first, second or third order. However, Eclipse Audio does not provide audio objects and in this sense has only very limited similarities with an object-based audio format such as Dolby Atmos. So if you're hearing that Eclipse Audio is going to replace Dolby Atmos, this is more the result of a bad marketing approach. These two formats are not really comparable with each other. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean that Eclipse Audio is bad or could not become the dominant immersive audio format. It just means that these things are not the same. They are like apples and oranges. Both are fruit. But if you're baking a cake, substituting one with the other might not always work. So with these little nuggets of information out of the way, let's jump right into the first question. The first one comes from user Not Only Reaper Tutorials. Now, if that username is supposed to be a hint, I'll take it. I honestly try to avoid Reaper. It's not necessarily a digital audio workstation that I like to use, but the reality is that it is just so flexible. And if you're working with immersive audio, it's just the best digital audio workstation to use. So yes, I do use Reaper if I'm working with immersive audio, and it's probably going to be a lot of Reaper tutorials in the future as well. Now I'm going to paraphrase the comment because there was a lot of stuff that user put into one question or comment, and essentially what the user said is that if you're using DaVinci Resolve in the studio version, you already have access to Eclipse Audio and pretty much anything else, so why even bother with any plugins? Now this is actually true, and if you are a user of DaVinci Resolve Studio, then you do have access to pretty much everything that's out there. So this is actually a good way to get started. The only problem with DaVinci Resolve is that its digital audio workstation, DaVinci Resolve Fairlight, is not really all that usable, especially if you're working with music. So yes, if you're mainly working with film and movies, then DaVinci Resolve Studio is probably going to be your best choice for pretty much anything. But if you are doing music, then this might not be an optimal choice. Nevertheless, if you want to get your feet wet, it's always a good idea to try things out in DaVinci Resolve first, because that can give you some sense of what the technology is capable of and what you can do with it. So while you might not want to use that in a music production environment, it's certainly a good way to get started and to get your feet wet in that particular technology. User Cherry Sound follows up on that. I really don't get why anyone should use this app if there are so many Dolby Atmos plugins for Pro Tools, Logic Pro or Cubase Nuendo. Now this is actually an interesting question because the question really is fundamental to why we have so many different immersive audio formats, right? So there's MPEG-H, there's Eclipse Audio, there's the Apple format, then there's Dolby Atmos, there is the Sony format. So why do we have that and why would anybody bother with using those formats? And the reality is that any technology provider, any company out there wants to create their own immersive audio format because they want to have some sort of control about how that actually is going to be implemented in their devices. And that essentially means that if you are producing content for those particular devices, you technically need to use those plugins. You need to use those formats because otherwise people can't listen to your stuff on those devices. So yes, while there are many ready-made plugins for Dolby Atmos and many digital audio workstations that have Dolby Atmos natively included, you still might want to kind of look at Eclipsa because it could just be that you want to produce something that can be heard on an Eclipsa kind of based device. And for that, you need to use Eclipsa Audio, so Dolby Atmos is not going to help you with that. User TheoMac8573 asks, how does Eclipsa deal with the LFE? Now that's really an interesting question, and for those of you who do not know, LFE stands for Low Frequency Effects channel, and that is a channel that is used in film and television in order to give you that rumble. So it's really meant to be more something of a haptic experience, something that you feel, kind of the big rumble that comes through having an explosion in a movie. It's not necessarily something that you want to hear, it's really something that you want to feel, and therefore it's something that actually kind of a lot of people in music production misinterpret because they think it is a subwoofer channel. That's not what it is. It's really more of an effects channel that is supposed to be felt rather than heard. And in that sense, it is used in a way that most music producers have trouble understanding, and that is that it is usually not included in any downmix that is binaural or stereo, for example, because simply if you have headphones on, you can't really feel that anyway. So it's not kind of giving you the effect it's supposed to give. So the standard way also in Dolby Atmos, for example, is that the LFE is not included in the binaural downmix. Now, how does Eclipsa work with LFEs? And the answer to that is it really mostly ignores it, or at least that's my understanding. Now, in the example that we did in my video about Eclipsa Audio, we used Ambisonics, and Ambisonics does not have an LFE channel. And Eclipsa Audio is also not generating one. That's something that your device where you play everything back might do in the bass management. But Eclipsa Audio doesn't really do that, at least to my understanding, it doesn't do that. Now, when it comes to channel-based surround sound, if you have, for example, a 7.1 and there is an LFE channel included, then what Eclipsa Audio will do is it will simply take that channel and forward it to the output. That's really all it does. I said in my tutorial that Eclipsa Audio is a little bit unusual in the sense that it doesn't really upscale. So what it really does is it just takes your channels and distributes it to the corresponding channels in your output device. So if you're having, for example, an audio element that is 5.1, meaning there are 6 channels, so 5 speakers and 1 subwoofer or 1 LFE, and that is an audio element in Eclipsa. What Eclipsa will do when it is played back on a 7.1 system, for example, it will distribute the 6 channels, the 5.1, to the corresponding speaker channels in your 7.1 and will ignore the other 2. So essentially you're only going to get sound out of 6 from your 8 speakers. So it's just mapping the speaker channels to the corresponding speakers in your setup. And that means that if your original audio element had an LFE, and there was signal on your LFE, then that signal is going to be sent to the LFE channel in your output. If there was no LFE or you didn't have an LFE channel, it's not going to be sent. So Eclipsa more or less ignores it. At least that's my understanding. If you want to correct me, please use the comments below or once again join our Discord server and get into a chat with me. I'd really like to learn more about Eclipsa Audio because quite frankly, the documentation is lackluster. User Immerse Audio pointed me at something that I did not immediately notice, and the user writes, is it Mac only though? I can't locate the Windows version. Now this is actually something that didn't cross my mind because it's just so weird. This technology, Eclipsa Audio, is actually meant to be a competitor to Dolby Atmos, which is usually associated with Apple ecosystems, if we are perfectly honest. And the fact that such a technology can only be produced within the Apple ecosystem is kind of weird. Yeah, I didn't think that that was actually the case. I didn't look at it quite honestly because I'm working on a Mac, so I just downloaded the Mac version. But apparently it's Mac only. Now they do work on a Windows version and it is an open source, so you could technically just compile it yourself. Not sure if that's easy to do, but you can try it, and you could also compile it for Linux, for example. Now, if you are successful in compiling it for Windows or Linux, let us know in the Discord. We would be really interested. There are a couple of people really looking forward to a Windows version of the Eclipse Audio applications or the plugins, but at the moment it's Mac only. User Letters7746 writes, I will definitely use the MUX video option for my Rock Band charts. Also the nightly version of VLC on Mac supports IAMF. Now this comment covers the two things that to me at least are really interesting. The first one is the application itself. So if we would be able to use that as a format in order to bring immersive video onto YouTube, that would be really cool. So if that's something that is possible, then yes. And technically it is. So the specifications would allow that. However, in practice, it does not yet work. Nobody has really implemented that. So you can only listen to immersive audio on YouTube via particular Samsung devices. That's all you can do. Apparently, they want to bring it to YouTube, but the YouTube implementation is very limited. At the moment, you can hear everything in a stereo binaural downmix. I'm not completely sure which one it is, but you don't really hear it immersively. So yes, this would be super interesting. But the second part of that comment is also very interesting, and that is the fact that VLC, at least on a Mac, once again on a Mac, weird, on a Mac supports IAMF in the nightly build, so in the beta version. So if you are producing Eclipse Audio, you're supposed to be able to listen to that on the beta version on a Mac. Now, as far as I know, that has the same issues. So you're not really hearing it immersively. You're just hearing a stereo or binaural fold down. Supporting doesn't necessarily mean that it covers all the features. It just means that you can actually play that audio on that particular software or system. And in this particular case, supporting just means that it is able to play it back in stereo or binaural. Now that was also mentioned by user Kokompe on our Discord server, and the user writes, I have tried exporting with the renderer, but the VLC beta glitches and does not truly work. Additionally, my 360 video is stereoscopic and it plays correctly on regular VLC, but not in the beta. So at the moment, it seems that while VLC, the beta version, is technically able to, or supposed to be able to support IAMF on Macs, it apparently doesn't really fully work. So yeah, at the moment, the only option that you have is either listen to everything in stereo, binaural, or purchase a Samsung TV. And maybe that's the reason why they do it that way. Maybe Samsung wants you to buy a TV. It could very well be. And one additional comment also from our Discord server from user Sutuk1212. When I stream a video from YouTube that is supposed to have IAMF audio, I only get a stereo fold down, even as I do have support for 7.1.4 audio on my system. And this is also my experience. So, kind of support technically just means that it can play it back, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it can play it back immersively. Apparently it does a fold down. Now, I'm honestly not entirely sure if this is stereo or binaural, either one of those two, but you only get 2-channel audio out of your video if it has IAMF audio included. User Observation Audio writes, if the metadata is correct for Ambisonics, you can use an Android phone with YouTube for head tracking. I find it kind of funny that a format that caters to Google and Samsung only offers plugins for Apple. Yeah, well, first of all, it is a container format, so the fact that an Android phone can understand Ambisonics doesn't necessarily mean that it can understand IAMF, because for that, IAMF actually needs to translate that in order to kind of make that available to the Android phone, if that makes sense. So yeah, well, technically it's Ambisonics, it's actually Ambisonics within a container format. So it's not as easy as just kind of being able to play back Ambisonics. There's a little bit more involved in that. Now, the second part is once again also something I find really funny. The fact that this is actually a format by Google and Samsung, and the only way to really use it is through Apple devices. It's so strange. And the last question is actually the one why I wanted to make this video, and I'm going to combine two questions from two users. The first question comes from user Linux Audio 100, and he or she writes, it's Google technology, means that it will probably be abandoned within 1 year. And in a similar direction, user Resolute115 writes, I'm concerned that Google chose unknown guys who have no experience in audio development. It's a generic IT company. This is so weird. Now, I deliberately took out the name of that company because I don't want anybody to hate on them. They're probably doing the best they can. But it is true that the plugins are a little bit lackluster. There's absolutely no documentation whatsoever, which drives me crazy, and the user experience is not where it should be. If you are a professional user and kind of working with plugins, you are used to better user experiences. Now, at the same time, these plugins are free, so what can you do? But for me, the bigger problem really is that Google and Samsung decided to release that in open source. You just need to think about what that actually means. It means that these two companies don't find it necessary to put the resources behind the development of that technology. Rather, what they want to do is they want to push it out into the community and then essentially have somebody out there develop everything for free. And they're selling that as a big kind of thing because now it's open and everybody can do that. But in reality, what it really means is they're not really willing to put the resources behind the development of that technology. And this can be seen both in the fact that it has been open sourced very early in the process, but also the fact that the people who are developing these plugins don't really have the background to do that properly. And that probably means that Google did not really spend a lot of money for the development at all. So they're probably kind of working on a minute budget. Now, I know a lot of people out there are very excited about the technology and don't want to take away your excitement. I feel you. But at the same time, I don't think this is going to go much further than that because, kind of in order to develop that, the companies just need to put resources behind it. If they don't put resources behind it, it's not going to get anywhere. Well, that's everything for today. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments or join our free Discord server. The invite link is in the description below. And don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on all things Dolby Atmos and immersive audio. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.